Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Sebbing. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make block 10 in the Dimensions Block of the Month quilt. We're almost done with this, and today we're using more of the pink Kinkame shades. We get all of this color variation from one strip of fabric, super cool, and we're going to be making a pinwheel today. So we're going to be cutting these rectangles into triangles. That's because the color change happens from selvage to selvage. So in order to get the color change to go from the bottom of the triangle to the top of the triangle, we have to first cut the rectangles and then cut the rectangles into triangles. But don't worry, we're saving all those little cast-offs for a fun improvisationally piece pillow at the end. Let's get started. You should be a pro at this by now, but we're going to go over the instructions one more time anyway. I've got the 45-degree line of my ruler lined up with the bottom or the darkest part of my rectangle, and then I have the tip in line with the bottom right of that rectangle, and I'm going to go ahead and slice off my corner. Now I'm going to turn this so that the bottom is now on the left side. I'm still lining up that 45-degree line with what is the bottom of that block, or will be the bottom of the triangle. And then I've got the tip now in line with what's the top left over here. I'm going to cut off this triangle. Hope you're saving these. Sew them together with a scant 1/4-inch seam and trim them down, and we'll create something fun with them at the end. Now let's cut the rest of these and we can get ready to sew together. Well, I have all my cutting tools out. I'm also going to cut my gray squares in half along the diagonal to create my half square triangles. So for this block, we're making a lot of pinwheels with a darker fabric in the center. So I've just lined up all of my blocks in the order that they're going to go together, with the darks where the center will be and the lights on the outer side. So that'll be easy. I can chain stitch all of these together. The first thing I want to do though is make sure I set my sewing machine up to sew a scant 1/4-inch seam. Because we're sewing on the bias here, that can stretch a little bit, and sometimes it can get a little bit bigger than it needs to be. So we want to make sure we leave ourselves a little bit of room to trim down to the right size. So what I'm going to do is, I have my sewing machine set up to sew regular 1/4-inch stitch. I'm going to move my needle width one position to the right, and that'll give me a little bit extra room when I sew. Let's get started. So all I need to do is put these right sides together, bring them over to my sewing machine, and stitch them down. Now I'm going to press all these open. To do that, I just open the seam with my fingertips and put the nose of the iron right down the center of that seam to press it nice and flat. You should just see a nice straight line here. If you see any wiggles, then that means you have a pleat and you need to fix it. And then I always hit it from the front side as well. This is where you can tell too, it should be nice and flat with no pleats. Now we're going to sew the 1/4 square triangles to our half square triangle. That's a solid fabric. And there's one thing to note, is that the side that we piece is going to be about 1/8 of an inch smaller than the gray triangle beneath it. I did that on purpose, so that way we'd have a little bit more to trim off, and we'd be sure to have exactly the right size piece when we go to sew the block together, which is when it matters. So just make sure that you're centering this pink half over the gray half, and you'll be just fine. I'm going to continue sewing this with the scant 1/4-inch seam. That way we'll have, again, a little bit extra to trim off, and we'll be really square when we put this block together. All right, keep on sewing and get all these guys sewn together. Okay, it's time to trim these down. So the first thing I'm going to do is line out my 45-degree line on my ruler across the main seam that's splitting these triangles, or the square in half. And then I'm making sure that my 4.5 inch mark where it hits the edge of the ruler is right on top of where these two seams come together. So that way that point is right in the corner. And I'm making sure that I've got fabric exceeding beyond all the 4.5 inch marks along this ruler. If it's right on top, that's okay. You just don't want it to be too skinny. That would be bad. So we're not taking too much off. There's just a little bit trimmed off here, a little bit more on that gray where I made it a little bit bigger. But really we're just trying to square this up so that way we have a nice block to work with. All right, again, we didn't take too much off, but this is going to be a lot better to work with all of our points of our triangles going right to those corners than it will be this one where it's not quite the right size. So definitely make sure you take the time to trim all these down. All right, we are ready to sew this block together, and we have got some careful pinning to do to make sure that all of these points come together perfectly in the center. So at the top, we don't have any seams coming together, so we just have to worry about pinning those corners together and we're good to go. On the bottom though, we do have these points that we need to make sure are coming together in the same spot. So since I press these seams open, the way I do that is I make sure that my seams are lined up right on top of each other so that the centers are in line. And then I kind of look at it from the top, and it's really easy to tell on this one because one side is light and one side is dark on each side. So you just want to make sure that those are perfectly on top of each other, and then put a little pin in the right side. And then I'll just put a pin up here as well. That way I know what side to sew, because otherwise I know myself I will sew this side and then I'll be picking seams out. So I'm going to go ahead and line up these corners and put a pin in up here as well. Not because I need it to hold those corners together, but so that I know what side I'm supposed to be sewing on. I'm going to repeat that on the bottom. Line that up, and then sort of peel that back and line it up so that way the seams are right on top of each other. And then take a peek from the top and make sure, again, that I'm perfectly centered with those points in that seam. And then we're going to pin down here as well, just so that I know what side it is that I'm supposed to be sewing. Now that we're done sewing all of our triangles together and we're sewing the units of the block together, we want to make sure we put our sewing machine back to a regular 1/4 inch stitch for this step. And then you can just go ahead and start sewing as you normally would, sewing that 1/4 inch seam. Now when I sew these, I stitch until my needle is right down in that first half of that seam allowance. That will make sure we hold all those points in place, and then I remove my pin. All right, so for this next part, the seam that we need to pay attention to is up top here. So I'm going to do it a little differently. What I'm going to do is leave that pin in place, and I'll sew my first couple of stitches into that seam allowance, again to get everything anchored in there with the needle and thread, and only then remove my pin. And then just stitch away. For this block, I'm going to press so that my seams are underneath my dark pink triangles. That'll hide the seam and prevent shadowing, and it will allow our seams to butt up right next to each other when we finish the block, which will make it easier to get that perfect center. So here you can see that the points have come together absolutely perfectly when we pin that. On this bottom one, I'm a little bit higher on the pink side than on the gray side, but it's close enough. I'm going to leave that be. All right, so I'm going to use a 2-pinning method here to get these points together. We've done this before, so it shouldn't be too much of a surprise. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put my pin in right on that center seam, right above where these triangles are coming together. And then I'm going to put it in on this side as well, just above right where those triangles are coming together. And what that does is it ensures that all my points are in the right spot. So I'm pinching that together between my thumb and forefinger keeping that right upright. And I'm not gonna move it now to pin, because if I move it, then I'm gonna move those points. I want them stayed right in line with each other. So I'm gonna take my second pin and I'm gonna pin that one in the side of that seam allowance with this one still sticking straight up. And that'll help keep everything in line. Now, as far as these ones go, yeah, we have some seams coming together here, but not here, so you don't have to pin these edges if you don't want to. All right, I'm still using that regular 1/4" seam to sew my block tabs together. I slow down when I get to the center just to make sure that I'm right where all those triangles are coming together. That's where I want to sew, so that way my triangles are right in the center of that block. All right, it's time for a moment of truth to see how these came together. It should be okay, because you can see where this seam line crosses my vertical seam here. I've got my thread going right across that. So that should mean that my point is right where it needs to be. Let's check the other side. And yeah, it's in the same position on this side as well. So that's good. So let's see how this point turned out. Oh, that's nice. I am very happy with that join. I'm considering this a good pinwheel. Yeah, you could mess with this and make it a little bit more perfect, but this is pretty darn good. I'm happy with this. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and open that back up so that way I can set my seam, press this block open. And just like all of our other blocks, we're gonna finish this up with a little bit of Mary Ellen's Best Press to help it lay nice and flat. That'll make for a really flat quilt top and a really great quilting experience. So this is it. We have finished block 10 in the Dimensions block of the month. And I just love how we get all this color variation from one width of fabric. It's really cool, and you didn't have to be really precise in choosing your fabrics to make sure you get all this nice subtle color change. It just happens automatically as the fabric moves from one darker shade to a lighter shade. If you enjoyed this tutorial, you can get the pattern and you can get a limited supply of kits over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We don't just do video tutorials for our own Quilt Addicts Anonymous patterns. We also have lots of great quilting tips and tricks to help you become a better sewer. We'll teach you everything from how to sew an accurate 1/4" seam all the way to how to bind a quilt. Thanks so much for following along, and happy quilting!